I'm
There you
here
go.
today with my good friend Belgium Jasper from, well, I should just call you Jasper. The channel is Belgium Jasper. And if you guys don't know who this dude is, I'm going to have a link on the discussion below on the description of the video so you guys can go check out his YouTube channel where he does great content, great interviews. Not as good as my stuff, but great stuff nevertheless. So go hit him with a follow, go hit him with a subscribe. And I want to say thank you for you taking the time before you go on your much needed holidays to chat with me about some of yours and some of mine biggest disappointments of 2023 when it comes to metal albums.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pedro. I mean, it's too bad that Antonio's not here because he's carrying the show on your end. But
Yeah, it's true.
I'll settle for you. And thanks for calling out. You could just call me Jasper. It's interesting to see that. So like, yeah, the channel is called Belgian Jasper. And there's a surprisingly high amount of people that think that Belgian is my first name, and Jasper is my last name.
All right, so let's start as that being the biggest disappointment of 2023, discovering
No,
that your first name is not Belgium.
yeah, no, it's okay, man. People can call me whatever they want. I'll listen. I'll listen.
Wow. Anyways, people have called me Antonio, so I mean, I guess that's not too bad compared to people thinking that your first name is Belgium.
No, no, for I'm Belgian, by the way, not Belgian.
Belgian. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
sorry. My
Like you're
pronunciation. My,
Portuguese Pedro, not Portugal Pedro.
yeah,
Although
yeah, yeah.
Portugal Pedro sounds like a good porn star name. So
Well,
that's
there's Portugal the man.
there you go. There you
So,
go.
there could always be that. All right. So, once again, these are some of our disappointments of
Yeah.
2023. Just because we're disappointed by the record doesn't mean that the record is bad. I mean, in some cases, it might mean that the record is bad, but either way, I just want to emphasize that because I'm not a big fan of shitting on bands or throwing bands under the bus. But I will throw one band under the bus during this discussion today, and I'm going to make a point of that. But for special reasons, because I got a beef.
Because
So,
they didn't invite you on their bus. Is that why?
no, because they
Okay.
didn't have a bus and they wanted to run me over with their U-Haul. That's kind of how it's going to go. But I'll let you'll everything will make sense once we get there.
All right. All right.
So, as far as disappointments of the year, let's leave your biggest disappointment of the year for the end and my biggest disappointment of the year for the end. But when you think of big disappointments for 2023, which is the first one that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few. I will preface with I think this was a good year for hard rock and metal. I thought there were a lot of good releases. You and I have the blessing and a curse that we get introduced to so many albums. Like it's sometimes tough to keep up. Like there's certain Fridays that 100 albums come out, and it's like we can't listen to them all. I see best of the year lists pop up already on YouTube. I'm doing like a thing as well, and there's albums that I didn't even get to listen to. So I'm sure that there's more disappointments out there than I actually have. There was quite a few. I also limited myself to only full albums because I've got beef, and maybe I'll say that for later, with a couple of EPs out there as well. But I'll focus on albums, and I'll just go with one that was released early in the year, mid-February. A band that I had high expectations for, a band that is kind of like a lot of people consider them to be one of like not yet a headliner for festivals, but getting there. And that was Dance Devil Dance by Avatar. And it's just like it's a band that's, they're popular for all the right reasons. I like this band. I've been following them from the get-go. I thought that, Feathers and Flesh was really good. Avatar Country was really good. I've always given them a lot of like credit. But this album for me just fell completely flat. I thought it was so boring. The sound is weird as well. The production, I think the vocals throughout the album sound like they were recorded in a steel barrel somewhere. I can't quite put my finger on it, but they had a couple of hits on this song, on this album for sure, like Dance Devil Dance the song as well, like had a good pre-chorus, but it was kind of like sandwiched in between a very boring pre-chorus and an actual chorus. What was a big hit? The Dirt I'm Buried In, I believe, also for me falls flat. And I've seen this band live many times, and I Hail the Apocalypse, I love that album. I just expect that to explode, and for me that new album, it just
For
fell
me,
flat.
it
It's
was better
forgettable.
than the predecessor
Right.
because
What was that one with the mouth on
yeah,
the cover?
yeah. So I thought this one was better than that record. I thought that record was a bigger disappointment following Avatar Country.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed this record. I'm not on board with you per se. I mean, I understand your
Yeah.
points, but for me, this was maybe because my expectations had been lowered with the previous album by Avatar, and I'm a
Right.
big fan of them. I think they're one of the best live bands out there.
100%.
Uh,
100%.
really enjoy their music. This album, it worked for me maybe a little bit more because I had the bar really low coming in.
Right.
Because the
Right.
previous record, it didn't. The way you feel about this one is kind of how I felt about that one,
Right.
and that lowered the bar for me. That lowered the expectations, and because of that, I'm maybe I was able to enjoy it more and see beyond some of its flaws. So
Right. Right.
because of
Right.
that, I really digged it.
So I'm curious to see how you'll feel in a few years from now, because I have a hard time right now remembering any song of a previous album, which is a perfect sign that I didn't go back to it at all, right? And so I'm curious, like, if we talk about this in a year from now, like, how often will you have still played, Dance Devil Dance? Because, like, I'm sure that, like myself, you listen intensely to new albums coming out, especially if you prepare for interviews and
Mhm.
so on and what have you. But then, like, a year later, it's always like a good measure, like, have I even gone back to these albums, right? Like, even if I thought they were really good, because albums, like, there are albums that can be my favorite albums that I know is within their genre, not even the best album of the year, but I just for some reason keep playing it over and over and over again, right?
I have the reverse of that. Siamese released an album last year called Home, and it didn't make it to my top 10 albums of the year. But this year, if I was to look at one of which was one of the albums that didn't make my top 10 that I listened to, perhaps even more than some that made my top 10,
Right, right,
that
right.
album would have been on the list. Which today I was driving to work and I'm thinking, how did this album not make my top 10 when I listen to it so
Yeah,
often?
yeah, 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 yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that there's also that dynamic of a record that when it comes out you feel like it's good, but maybe not as good as some other records, but then through the course of time it kind of gains a foothold and it
Oh
becomes a
yeah,
little bit more important than other albums that you thought perhaps were better or more important. At the
100%.
bottom of my list I have Virgin Steel, their latest record, The Passion of Ionidas, or Leonidas,
Dionysus, yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever the name of the damn thing is. I think the audio tapes that Bin Laden released during his prime time were better recorded than this record. It sounds awful. The production is awful. I mean, it sounds like it was recorded in a basement by a bunch of kids with no money, just trying to put it. It sounds like a demo.
Right, right. And there's some things that have to stay in the past, because, like, Virgin Steel has some of the best song of the 80s. And one of the very first metal shows I ever saw in my life as a young teenager was actually Virgin Steel. So I always had like a bit of a passion for them, but some things can stay in the past. We don't necessarily need a new Virgin Steel album this year.
Yeah, and if you're gonna put together a record, then don't you listen to it before you put it out? Like honestly, it sounds like a demo, and that's my
Yeah,
problem. It just doesn't have any clarity to the sound. It's really hard to follow because you just don't feel like you're listening to a finished product.
yeah. No, for sure. And I think I would even go one step further. What you said, like, uh not only listen to it, but have somebody else listen to your stuff before you put it out, because you listen to your own stuff, you're in your bubble. You need somebody that can tell you that something's not good before you put something out. I feel like we've seen that a lot with some very big bands as well, their own difficulty to edit themselves, right? We don't necessarily need an Iron Maiden album where every song is 4 minutes of intro, and a riff gets repeated 64 times. Like bands need to be able to edit themselves, or at least surround them with people that are not afraid to tell them that. Yeah, I hear you. For me, maybe kind of similar to what you just said. I kind of already, for me, Virgin Steel, have a passion for that classic band, if you will, and I'm happy to keep it in the 80s and the 90s. And I I remember that it came out, but honestly, I'd forgotten until you now bring it up. So
And it's the only album that I reviewed this year that I created a review that I was super negative about. Like
mm.
I don't think there's anything positive in the review, and that's hard for me because
Some
I
bands
always
on Twitter have a different opinion about that.
we're gonna talk about them later on. That's the
Oh,
ones that
okay.
I was referring to. So it was the reason I put it on my list. It's the only
Yeah.
album that I reviewed that's on my list of disappointments. Not that I went in expecting a lot, because I didn't, but I'm expecting a band that's releasing an album professionally through a major label to release a record that doesn't sound like a demo. That's all. That's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's the bare minimum that I'm asking for. Well, who
No,
else do you have on
that's
your
fair.
list?
I'll go to a local artist, which and it pains me. Yeah, I know. Hey, I'm not afraid to get punched in the face when I go to a show next time. Um, I'm not here to score or lose any points. I'm here to give my honest opinion. This was one that I was just bummed about because I wanted to like this album. Initially, I told myself I liked it. Rarely gotten back to it, and if I compare it to everything else in the in the catalog of this now legacy band, it just doesn't. It's uninspired, I think, is the word that comes to mind for me, and I think it's just a shame. And I'm talking about Electric Sounds by Danko Jones. um love this band, grew up with this band, saw them 20 plus years ago for the first time, seen them many times. Always loved the energy that they bring to the stage, but the energy was just so much lacking now, and I thought it was unfortunate. It really feels like it was like, okay, this band is known for bringing out an album every 2 3 years, and it was kind of like, yeah, check the box, and very little energy around that. I first thought it was hilarious the way that Danko himself was doing like these fake videos to promote the album, like on his socials, and like they went a little viral, and it was just very cynical about everything, and it's like, oh, that's funny, a little character I plays. But then as you really go into the album and not see anything new, anything that is really inspiring, you kind of ask yourself, like, okay, maybe that's just the way he feels. And is now I had a chance, obviously, to interview him, and yeah, I just think that he's right now not the most passionate about it, and I think it translated to the album.
It's a couple of things I have to say about this. First of all, is the chances of Danko Jones punching you are slim to none because you would have to carry around with him a ladder just to reach your face. So that's number one. Number two, the last time I interviewed him was on the previous album cycle. And one of
Right.
the first questions I asked him is, what separates this record from the previous ones in the discography? And he goes, nothing. And when you answer like that about a record that you're releasing, that it's new,
Right.
what makes a listener want to listen to your new record when your new record sounds exactly like your old records? If that's the case, I mean, you're not AC/DC.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
But even
So
if he is, like I don't mind, because I like the rock and roll that Danko Jones plays. So the music is one thing, but then if you go to the lyrics, like I had a lot of fun with some songs that he wrote, 2015, even just for the Power Trio, the last album.
yeah, Power Trio, the one before this one.
Yeah, but then this one, like the lyrics are, you were saying earlier about Virgin Steel, like, oh, it sounds like it's recorded by a group of primary school kids or whatever. Like it feels like the lyrics were kind of written that way this time. It's like, guess who's back? Me, motherfucker. Yeah, I'm back. Okay, hey, I'm back. It's like, okay, great. We're here for a good time to fuck. No, we're here to
Sounds
fuck
like
things up and
lips
have a good
from
time.
sounds like Lips from Anvil wrote his lyrics.
Well, it just, yeah, it just, it was a little too simple. And again, like his rock and roll, like he is inspired by AC/DC, he's inspired by the Misfits, but in the past he brought a little bit more, I felt, of that energy and some creativity, and I just didn't get that now. And again, for me, this is, again, it's a pretty solid rock record. This is not a bad album, but knowing what he has put out earlier, or what they put out, I should say, because it's a person but also a band. um uh, I was just expecting a lot more of it, and I really thought that Power Trio was a pretty good one. So I had high hopes. I know that Power Trio was the album that he kind of like dealt with that dark shit of the pandemic and being depressed and what have you, and I was kind of hoping that he was able to get that out of his system with that album, and that this new album, which by the way, like had a #1 single in Germany, which is a big deal. Like
I
Germany's
mean,
a
but
big
let's
market.
face the facts. When was the last time the Germans were known for good taste?
Well, ooh, you like to be buddy with a lot of German bands on your channel, so I.
But I'm talking about Germans in general. Historically speaking,
Well,
they've
historically speaking,
followed,
the Belgian has a few problems with Germans, but maybe we
like
shouldn't go there.
generally speaking, Germans have followed the wrong trends over the years. Let's put it that
Right,
way. So
right, right,
there's
right.
always that historical aspect to it that we have to keep in mind when it comes to Germans.
Fair enough.
But they
Fair
have a
enough.
great sense of humor. If there's one thing that they're
Yeah,
known
yeah,
for,
yeah.
is definitely their sense of humor.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
so I have to mention this one, and I feel like this one is kind of a give me. I feel like it's like one of those that everybody's going to say, like, of course that's going to be on
okay,
your
let
list.
me guess.
What are you going to say?
Well, you're gonna say 72 Seasons by Metallica.
Yes.
There you go.
I just, it's kind of the elephant in the room for me.
Right.
I had the reason I'm disappointed with the record is because I felt like Hardwired to Self Destruct was an excellent album, like really excellent album. Uh, I didn't
It
think
was a bad
Metallica.
double album, but if it was just a single album, it would have
I
been a
think they could have
fantastic album.
condensed it into
Yeah.
an extremely solid single record. I think they
Yes.
diluted a little bit by making a double album. I agree with you on that. But considering a lot of the steaming garbage that they had released in their later years in their discography, I didn't think they had an album like that left in them. And
Right.
so when I heard that album, I was like, wow, this is somewhat refreshing
Yeah.
from a Metallica standpoint. It was refreshing. There's a lot of songs on that record that I still listen now. Like like if I was to put together a greatest hits of Metallica songs, I'm gonna have to bring a few tracks
Yeah, for
from
sure.
that album into that greatest hits. Atlas Rising, Spit Out the Bone, just the name
Yeah.
Hardwired, Self Destruct. I mean, there's a lot of great songs on that record that made the overall experience, even though it's slightly diluted, I agree with you, it still made the record really solid. So
Right.
coming off of that, my expectations were a little bit higher because,
Right. Right.
if that album had been Reload version 2.0, then the bar would have been low for me coming
For
into this
sure.
record.
For sure.
But that album kind of reset the bar for me. So 72 Seasons, I just found it so uninspiring. You were talking about Danko Jones feeling like, oh, we have to release an album every 2 years, so let's check the box. I feel kind of the same way about this Metallica record. It feels to me that, okay, we need new material in order to really have not that they need a reason, but to have a reason to
Yeah.
go on tour and play live shows. Let's just put this record together. It just feels very blasé. There's nothing really memorable about it. How many times can I listen to James Hetfield doing, "Oh yeah, yeah," like you know what I mean? Like it's just, I didn't find anything that would almost force me to go back to the record after listening to
Right.
it. It's one of those albums that in the discography of the band is going to just be another record. It's not going to be
Interesting.
a record.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I think you're full of shit. But I mean, no, is 72 Seasons the best album of the year? No. Is it the best Metallica album? No. Definitely not. It's for me, I didn't put it in one of my disappointments. I don't like everything on the album, far from it. This was for me, I thought it was a little bit more of a different album. It sounds a little different than other stuff they've done. Very different from, like, it kind of feels like with Hardwired, when they rediscovered their own roots. And with this album, I feel like every song is almost like a tribute to a band that inspired them. So Lux Eterna for me is overkill by Motorhead. And there's a couple of other songs on there that I feel like, oh, this is very Thin Lizzy-ish, like a lot more 70s classic rock in the sound. I was expecting you to bring it up, the album, and I went back to it a couple of times. It's like, I want to be honest with myself. Do I think it's good or not? I think Lux Eterna, the song itself, is really, really good. And I've listened to it throughout the year several times. But I was also like, I didn't have maybe the same expectations that you had after Hardwired. Because I agree with you, that was a great album. I thought that Death Magnetic had some good stuff too, actually. I don't think that Metallica needs anything to tour. Like, Metallica can basically not release anything anymore, and in 20 years from now, will still sell out arenas if they wanted to. But I when I was listening back to it, it's like, it's just, I thought it was a solid album. It's not something that I'm gonna remember forever. So for me, yeah, it
But keep
wasn't
in mind,
great.
I'm not
I'm
saying
not
it's a bad
disappointed about
record.
it.
I'm not saying it's a bad record. I'm saying I'm disappointed in that record because of the expectations that Hardwired to
100%. I
Self-Destruct
get that.
set.
I get that.
So
I
for
get
me,
that.
it was a step down from what that album delivered before. If there was no Self-Destruct album, then this record comes across in a different. You look at it in a different
100%.
light.
100%. And I will say that I do think that Lux Eterna, the first single, stands out by a mile compared to the other songs, and how good I thought that song was. did kind of disappoint for me the rest of the songs, if you will. Because when that first single came out, I was like, okay, great. Because with Hardwired, the title track came out first as the first single. And that was like a cool, thrashy song. But in hindsight, Spit Out the Bone, Atlas Rise for me are better songs even. So it's, you know, to use to go back to their 90s times, you know, for me, Metallica, you know, ejected their load with the first single on this album, and then kind of fell flat after that. But there is an album for me that is a bigger disappointment still than Metallica. So do you want me to go there?
Yeah, go there.
Awesome. And before I'll do it, I'll share a couple of what runners down. Is that the right way to say it?
And you said you had some beef with some EPs, so
yeah. So I had some beef with some EPs, and ones in particular actually. So we both really like Sabaton. The EPs they put out for their, you know, Heroes of the Great War and the whatever of the Great War and so on, and Stories of the Great War, for me, I thought was just unnecessary. Now, they're smart, they're a company, they're a machine, they have a marketing engine, and they understand that in today's world of mainstream music, you need to regularly have something out. So I totally get that, where they're coming from, and they're doing a fantastic job, better than any metal band today, I would say. Like maybe them and Powerwolf are probably the two bands that have figured out how to successfully run a band as a company, as a brand. But what I did not appreciate was when they covered Motorhead's 1916 song, which is a very vulnerable, intimate song. Even when Motorhead plays it, it has been covered a million times, and there's some really cool acoustic versions out there of a young soldier, you know, being disillusioned with the war, signing up and seeing everybody, you know, die around him, eventually himself. And it's a very, very emotional song. And for me, Armistice Day is really important. Again, growing up in Belgium, you know, World War One had a massive influence on the country. And it's just one of those songs that I don't need this triumphant, bombastic Sabaton version of, where the video, everybody walking through the street and trying to be all serious. But it's like, it's too epic.
Yeah,
for what that song needs to be.
Mood.
It should be just like, hey, no, this is not to march in the streets. No, this is to sing by yourself on the gravestone of somebody that fell, and have some serenity. And I thought that was a shame, because they didn't need it. They have their movie, they've got stuff to talk about. So for me, that EP was just something that I was just disappointed with, but from a very different angle, if you will.
To be honest with you, speaking of Sabaton, I've been disappointed with them since the previous record after the.
Yeah, but that's just because they did an interview with me and not with you. That has nothing.
No. Listen. I've interviewed them plenty of times on the channel.
I'm joking.
It's just that I felt like I felt coming out of the Great War, coming out of that record, which I thought was a good record, not a great record, but a good record.
Solid.
It felt to me that because of the pandemic and whatever, maybe they had some tracks left over from that album cycle.
They did, yeah.
And then they put together another record about the same war, but you know, it just didn't have the same pizzazz. The songs felt like all beat tracks. And I almost felt like they should have just released a bunch of EPs instead of releasing another full-length record with those tracks. I think would have been a smarter move, to be honest.
I agree.
Break them down and release them. And I with Sabaton, there's so much to cover, and there's so much that they can do. I just feel like their choice of topics in some of the songs, like you mentioned, that one is a perfect example, have been a little suspect of lately. Like, I don't think they've. I'm not saying that they're. It almost feels to me like the business side of the band, which has become a lot bigger than it was, let's say, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I think that has influenced them on the creative side of things, and that has had, in my opinion, a negative impact on the music that they've put out. I'm still confident that a future record is going to be a great record. I'm still a fan, but I'm with you. I'm a little bit disappointed with those EPs, with the approach, with a lot of things surrounding their camp, and I hope that they don't let the machine, the Primo Victoria machine that they've created, I hope they don't let that influence the
Right.
creative side, and allow the creative side to be what it used to be.
Yeah.
I don't know if there had been, I don't know if there has been some changes in the back end in terms of who's writing the lyrics, who's writing the songs, who's working with them. I know it was always a collaboration in the past with not ghost writers, but they had people with them that helped them
Yeah.
work on
Yeah.
certain songs and certain lyrics. I don't know if that has changed, but we definitely have seen an impact in terms of what they're putting out, and their sound too. It's a lot more keyboards in their sound and their latest stuff, which I think it's taking a little bit away from the power of the guitars. Which to me, the guitars and the vocals have always been the two cornerstones of Sabaton. And they've always had keyboards and stuff like that. I just don't
Right.
want like you mentioned that song. There's a bunch of songs on the latest record that the topic of the song is very somber.
Right.
It's very how can I say, it's very eerie. And when you
Hmm.
put keyboards and you put this, because the keyboards create this cinematic feel of
Right.
everything being
Right.
learned, it kind of goes against the nature of what the song is. I mean, if you're writing a song about people dying on the snow hills in Italy because they were trapped and they were cornered and they died of the elements, I don't need keyboards or symphonic elements to make that.
Right. Right.
What I mean, it should be the other way around. You should have less of that, so that you can really feel the mood of what it meant to be in that place at that time at that moment. You know.
100%. Yeah, like for example, when they did that cover of Motorhead's 1916, if that would have been just an a cappella version of just voices singing, like that would have been, maybe that would hit me probably in a different way. But yeah, there were more disappointments on my end for sure. One thing that I felt was so unnecessary, and I understand also why they're doing it. I don't think it's a pure artistic reason why they did it, but the Cavalera reissues of the Sepultura classics, for me, like that, like from an artistic perspective, as a fan, as a listener, I don't need that. I've got my classic albums that nostalgia driven I'll go back to. I don't need you. I know why you do it, all the reasons that are involved with it, but I just felt that was a bit of a unfortunate. But my biggest
By
disappointment.
the way, just to
Oh,
say
sorry, go
this,
ahead.
I'm not a fan of any reissues or any remastered stuff. I mean, there's a reason why stuff sounded the way they sounded when it was released.
Right.
And for me personally, that if I grew up listening to an album that came out in a certain era, that's how I want the album to be. I don't want the album to
Right.
be messed with. That's just my personal
Yeah,
feel.
yeah.
Having said that, these Cavalera reissues, they sound amazing, but they sound nothing like the originals.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
And
therefore
to
for me they
me,
don't sound good.
yeah, and for me, the originals, the allure of those records, even if you go beyond those two, and if you go into Schizophrenia, because Schizophrenia by Sepultura is not the best produced album ever, neither is Beneath the Remains for that matter,
No. No.
but they are what they are. And they had the impact on the listener at that time period with that sound. And I think when you're trying to, and I understand the business side of it, like you said, I get it. I totally get it. But I think some things are better just be left as they are.
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. I think right off, there's only two times that I can think of where I genuinely loved like a re-recorded something better. One is the was it Blast from the Past, like Gamma Ray Greatest Hits came out in 2000, and like the 80s or the early 90s songs of Gamma Ray were re-recorded because with Kai Hansen singing, not Ralph Schapers, which funnily enough for me worked better on those songs. And then an album that the band tries to forget, or a whole period that the band tries to forget. Do you remember the Greater of Two Evils compilation by Anthrax? It was the last thing that John Bush did with them. It was all these Anthrax classics, but re-recorded with John Bush, who I think is one of the best metal singers of all time. And I love that album, but it's like now it's kind of like what the Maiden did with Paul Di'Anno and Blaze Bayley. Like Bruce Dickinson was our only singer ever. Like
Yeah.
every compilation album is like it's all Bruce songs and the Klansman live, or like whatever, Running Free live. Never the original versions anymore. Anyways, my biggest disappointment, maybe not as big as a name as Avatar or Danko Jones or Sabaton, but definitely still a legendary name for people that are a little bit more into metal than the pure mainstream. The Shadow Inside by Sadus, and it really, really destroyed me. Like I was so
Really?
hyped for this. It was 17 years that we had to wait for a new Sadus album. Obviously, Steve not being there anymore, Steve, the bass player, for me was always kind of like what Sadus was. That was the unique part of the sound. Only was it John and Darren left in the band now, and I was like, because I feel that for thrash metal, it's not been a great year. I think there's some good stuff coming out, but if you compare it to like how other subgenres are, death metal and symphonic metal, power metal, and
There's two great thrash metal albums this year. Overkill's record is amazing, Scorch, and Angel Zapatrida, Aftermath. I think those two albums are
I'm not
outstanding.
saying there aren't good ones, but I feel like of the classic genres, I'm not going to look back in 10 years from now and go like 2023 was a great year for thrash.
No, it's a great year for death metal. Great year for death
100%. Metal. Exactly. That's a perfect example. So thrash for me was like this whole year we've had a couple of decent releases, but it wasn't like this golden wave that we've seen with other genres. And I was like, but hold on, in November, the new Sadus album is gonna come out. Like, oh, I can't wait. Like that has to be good. And it's absolutely terrible. It's and whether or not songwriting is good or not, it's hard for me to even focus on that because, like you felt with the Virgin Steel album, it sounds so bad. First of all, it starts with 2 intros, which is super stupid. Like the first song is like 6.5 minutes long, and it's like first 30 seconds of one intro, then that stops, and you think, okay, boom, riff. No, there's this whole different intro that starts again, and then there's good riffs, like good sharp thrash metal riffs, but the drums sound awful. And like Pedro, I mean, I know that I look much younger than you, but we're roughly the same age. And remember back in the day when you were downloading like Kazaa and Napster stuff, and it was all
I never had it. I don't know what you're referring to.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, like, but remember
LimeWire, I don't know
like
that
a
one
copy?
either.
Yeah, exactly. That all sounded so terribly compressed, because it was, right? And the drums on this album throughout sound like that with like this shh, sound over it, and it just completely destroys it for me. And I was just like, I was so annoyed with it because it's such a weird production. And I was really hoping that this was going to be the thrash album of the year. And again, I'm sure there's good songwriting on there. Although again, without Steve, and there's some good thrash riffs there, but it just, if the production sucks, and we're not talking about medieval black metal written by one guy somewhere in a prison, then for a thrash metal album, the comeback album after 17 years on Nuclear Blast, it has to sound fantastic. There's no excuse why this album doesn't sound fantastic. And I was really disappointed. I
liked it. I think you need to change your headphones. Those beats are not made to listen to thrash metal. You need to get some better headphones, some Valcos. I can get you a disc. I can get you a discount code.
I was waiting for you to drop your discount code. I'm sure that in the description of this video.
In the description of this video, you can buy some Valcos and get yourself a discount by using the code Pedro at checkout. So headphones made by metalheads for metalheads in Finland. It doesn't get more metal than that. I don't agree with you about Sadus, but I actually enjoyed the record. I thought the album was good, but I didn't have really high expectations. I know there was a long window of time.
Oh yeah.
But just because there was a long window of time, I didn't really that lowered my expectations, to be honest, because I felt like, I'm just happy that they're releasing something. Even though it came out on Nuclear Blast, Nuclear Blast is only really doing the distribution for them. They own everything. So it's kind of a weird partnership there because it's technically on Nuclear Blast, but it's not really a Nuclear Blast record. So that also lowered my expectations coming in. I thought the vocals were really good. I really enjoyed the vocals, and I like the album. It's not the greatest album of the year, but honestly, it's not the worst album that I heard either. I just think it's one of those records that is okay for me. It's okay. It's a good album. Like if it comes on, I'm not skipping it. Like I'm listening to it. I enjoy the record. Going back to the previous point, I just want to mention one thing because you mentioned the albums that you didn't mind the remaster or re-release. For me, there's only one album that I would like to see a remaster and re-released, and that is "And Justice for All" with bass. Not because Listen, let me explain. Not because I don't like the record as it is, because to be honest with you, I think that record is very underrated, because everybody
Oh
always
yeah.
talks about the bass, but they forget that that album has incredible songs. Incredible songs. Harvest of Restaro, One,
Dyer's Eve.
yeah, and Justice for All. I mean, it's a great freaking record. Really great freaking record. I would just like to, from a curiosity standpoint, I would like
Right.
to listen to it with bass to see what could have been. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just pure curiosity. That's all there is to it.
On
Now,
that note, let's if we're doing that, let's also get a Saint Anger without steel drums and with guitar solos.
yes, yeah. Once again, not that I want to change the past or
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
or whitewash the past. I just kind of want to see how could have been. Well,
Right.
what if, what if that's all.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, as far as the top album of the year that I feel like it's overrated. I feel like it's just kind of blasé, but I feel that way about the band in general. I don't like this band. So maybe I'm biased when I'm putting this album up there because I don't like the band just a little bit. I don't like the band. Uh, I've tried my best to listen to these guys.
And when
I
you say
really
you
have.
don't like it, you mean the music or just the personality of the people?
No, I don't like I'm not talking about
No, no, I know you're not talking about those guys.
those guys yet. I'll get to that, but I don't like the sound. Like it doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why so many people love them. That's the other issue that I have, that I'm still trying to figure it out. What's the love? What do people find in this band that I'm not able to find? Is it one of those things that it's not you, it's me? Maybe. And the band is Sleep Token, and they released "Take Me Back to Eden." Um, Funny enough, is one of the lowest rated albums on Metal Injection for the year of 2023. So a lot of people that go to that website that rate albums obviously rated it really low because it's one
Right.
of the top lowest rated albums. For me, it's an album that just doesn't. I don't mind if you enjoy the band and you enjoy what they're doing. I don't have any. I don't think any issues to it. I just don't like when people call them necessarily a metal band, because to me they're not a metal band. They're maybe a rock band at best. Um, but just because Rihanna goes on stage with Nuno Bentoncourt, it doesn't make her a metal band either. So I
Right.
just think that my issue is more so with how people want to fit them into a category that I don't believe they fit into. And if you try to fit them into that category, then I'm going to look at them through a different lens, because if you take them out of that category, now I'm looking at them from a completely different lens. So if I look at them as a metal band and I look at it from that perspective, the album has to be a disappointment because it doesn't really deliver
Right.
any metal. You know what I mean? So it's a band that I just don't feel like brings anything to the table. Uh, I mean, I'm sure they do, and I'm sure people love it. Obviously, the ticket prices are what they are. They're one of the most expensive tickets. They sell as fast as Taylor Swift. So obviously, there is something to Sleep Token that I'm just not grasping. And
Yeah.
I've given it my best of listening to them and whatnot. I just don't feel inspired by their music. For me, music, especially metal music, I have to connect with something. Either the
Right.
emotion in the music, the lyrics, the sound. I have to feel driven. I have to feel like by listening to this band or this song, it makes me want to do something. It makes me feel something. And when I listen to them, it's like I'm listening to elevator music. It just doesn't. It's like ambiance.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
ambiance.
No, for sure, for sure. Um, I'm I'm sort of with you, with the extent that so this new album, I don't even remember the title. You just mentioned it. So Sleep Token completely passed me by before that. So because this is what their third or fourth album, I don't know,
Yeah,
but they
something
were
like that.
already quite, the following, and especially in the UK, obviously, and blowing up. Um, and I just also, again, we get like, I'm sure that we're recording and it's almost 1 o'clock right now for us. We probably both have received 100 new emails today already from all this shit, right? So there's so much to listen to. And I find that sometimes the biggest bands are the ones that fly me by the fastest. Yeah. And I had not listened to Sleep Token until this new album came out, and I was like, oh, everybody's raving about it. Okay, like let's listen to it. And after 2 or 3 songs, I'm like, yeah, not for me. Now, again, like you say, like other people will love it, and maybe it's more for a newer generation. That's totally fine. I don't want to be a gatekeeper or anything like that. But for me, I just kind of like it. I don't connect with it, like you say, and I just kind of was bored with it. The reason why I didn't put it as one of my three is because I didn't have big expectations before, because I was just like, I genuinely had never listened to a single song of them before I hit play on this new album. And but what they do well. Obviously, like marketing wise, it works really well. Mystery always helps. I will say that they played Grass Bop. They played in one of the tents, and I didn't have a chance to go check them out, but I heard from a lot of other people that were covering the festival that they were very disappointed with it. And when I listened to the album, and I actually listened to it again a couple of days ago, because I was like, oh, Sleep Token, should that be one of them that we talk about? And I was kind of expecting that it would come up in some way. It is so overproduced as well, right? Like
Yeah, it takes all
it's hard to bring
organic
that
nature of the
life.
record.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's not my thing. And I also didn't put, like, for example, Avenged Sevenfold on my list, because they did a very weird album this year, and a lot of people are like, oh, what's this? But also, like, I wasn't really waiting for that album, or
Yeah,
really,
neither was I, to be
whatever.
honest with you.
So to the point, like, it's not. I might find the albums that I did call out better albums, but at the same time more disappointing, because I was
But I think
expecting
the
or
higher
hoping.
your expectations on a record,
Exactly.
the
That's
higher the
the thing.
disappointment, right? If you're not expecting anything from a band, or if you're not looking for anything from a band, then it's kind of hard to be disappointed by somebody that you're not expecting to be impressed by as well, right? So I think there's a little bit of
Right.
that. Before we go, I want to mention Arrival of Autumn, because I had a beef with these guys, or they had a beef with me. I didn't have a beef with them. They had a beef with me on Twitter, started on Twitter, because they didn't like my
On
review of their
X.
album. And X, yeah. Well, back then was still Twitter. Back then was still Twitter. They had a
Tomorrow
beef
it's
with me.
Z or whoever.
Yeah, they had a beef
Sorry,
with me
right.
because of how I review their record and what I said about their record. And funny enough, I was looking around to see what other publications are posting as their worst albums of the year, and Metal Hammer has them at number one. So the good news is they're number one. The bad
Right.
news is it's the worst albums of the year list.
But did you also see what Metal Hammer today announced as their best album of the year?
Oh no, that I missed.
I'll let you look that up by yourself and
Oh
be
no, now you
disappointed.
gotta tell me. Like you can't do
It's
this.
it's that it's that band Creeper. That, like, it's kind of like, what if the Misfits played in Twilight? Kind of like electronic gothy rock music. Um, yeah, I was, but
Now this
I'm
kind
not
of
so,
defeats my
but
other point,
metal.
I guess.
But, sorry, but you could turn it around like this way. The fact that Metal Hammer is actually covering you says enough, because basically, if you're, it's either Metallica, Maiden, Corey Taylor, and then just it's all stuff that most people agree with. Like, okay, that's just paid PR. Like, I used to subscribe to Metal Hammer, and when literally the pages with content were less than half of the magazine, and everything else was just advertising,
Yeah.
I was like, I'm done. It's unfortunate. I think I stopped following them as well on certain things. It's unfortunate. I know that this has been. I know that you've shared your frustrations about some of the bigger publications that, without any limitation, will take what you and I put out and rehash that, and squeeze everything out of that, without bringing a lot of very um, their own creative content, if you will, anymore. And I think a lot of people are frustrated with him, but there's 3 or 4 publications that still hold all the power at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I had this conversation with somebody else the other day, and I think the issue with the magazines these days is that a lot of band management still wants to see their band on the cover of a Metal
Oh yeah,
Hammer
it's a
or
big thing. It's a big
Revolver or
thing.
whatever. It's a big deal. It's a big exposure. But at the end, also, you have to look how many people are still reading these magazines. Not as much as before.
Yeah.
They're going to have to, at some point in time, sooner rather than later, they're going to have to reinvent themselves, or they're going to become a dinosaur. It's just the way it is. People are consuming media in a different way, as you know, as I know, and a lot of these publications and even festivals to a certain degree, I think you have to start to look at different ways of how you can create content and how can you monetize that content in a way that reaches the audience that you want to reach. Less and less people are buying physical media, less and less people are buying magazines, newspapers, and so
Yeah.
forth and so forth. So I think the onus is on them, because they, for many years, they were the ones championing the cause. So I think the onus is on them to change. And as change always comes, sometimes change has to be forced upon you. And I think in some of these cases, because of the people who are ahead of those organizations or those companies, have grew up in a different time period, have a different view on how things should be done, it's kind of hard for change to be impactful. So I don't think we're going to see much change unless that change becomes a force of nature that
Yeah.
they can't escape from it.
No, 100%, 100%. I mean, it's a far cry from, like, I was buying all these magazines as a teenager, but for the
Me
number one
too.
reason was because they came with a sample CD, and
For me,
that
it was
was
the
how I learned.
posters as well. I
Oh
love
yeah,
the
posters,
posters so I can put them in my room
and
and stuff like that.
and coasters and stickers and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. Yeah, no,
And I
for
used
sure.
to cut the magazines up, and then my school books, I would buy like a plastic clear sticker, and I would kind of put the magazine pieces, like my favorite bands, around my school books, and then create this fake cover, if you will. So when I would go
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
school, my binder, my books were all metal stuff. And that was one of the reasons I bought magazines, was more of
The
that.
popular kid in school.
Well, I grew up in Portugal. There's a lot of metal heads there, so by far I was not the only one going to school with metal stuff. So
There you
it
go.
wasn't that much of an issue as it is like in North America. Like my son going to school and people thinking he's going to be an active shooter because
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
wearing all black and he's wearing a black hoodie and that kind of stuff. I just want to mention that about Arrival of Autumn because I didn't give them necessarily a negative review. I was critical about certain parts of the album, and I think any band out there, first of all, there's no such thing as bad press. Press is press, and people are talking about you. That's always a good thing. And then I think the second part that you have to really learn from that is that, it's a cool. It's there is this environment where we all need one another. Like we listen to music, we review it, they
right.
need our reviews. Like we all need each other. And I think that burning bridges and ostracizing people because they have a different opinion than what you have, or because they don't like something that you did, and they present it in a constructive way, and they completely express their thoughts on why they don't like it, I don't think it's a reason to start a beef. I just thought I was vindicated for what I said when I see them on the top list of worst albums of the year on Metal Hammer. So
There you go.
I just felt vindicated. That's all. That's all. I'm not being
Uh,
resentful. Like I wish them nothing but the best, but I just felt vindicated.
yeah, yeah. And hopefully no bridges were burnt in this last hour, but maybe a little bit less stable than before.
I don't think we.
But hey, it is what it is.
It's just personal. At the end of the day, it's personal opinions.
Exactly.
You have yours, I have mine. People will agree, people will disagree. Once again, it's more from a perspective of being disappointed with something than necessarily something that's really bad. Even though in our case, both of us put together some strong cases for albums that were just bad. You know what I mean? Never mind the disappointment; they were just bad.
There were far more really terrible albums this year that I wouldn't call a disappointment or didn't touch on. So the albums that I did call out, they were definitely not as bad as many others out there.
Well, I'm going to say this. The worst album of the year could have easily been a different kind of record had Anvil released another album this year.
Tell
But
me how you really feel.
but they saved this by releasing a horrible record last year and then taking a year off. So it wasn't all that bad. I mean, like I said to you, I think this year is really a death metal year. When I look at my top 10 list, there's 4 death metal albums on a top 10 list. I don't think I've ever done a top 10 list with 4 death metal albums. So I think this was really a year for death metal more than anything else. But it's fun to talk about the albums we don't like. That's, for me, it's fun, but I don't like to dwell on it too much. I
For
rather spend
sure.
my time
Exactly.
listening to music that I really enjoy.
There you go. There you go. It was a good year. Last year was great as well. And we'll see what next year brings.
I'm sure next year is going to be phenomenal. I have high hopes for next year.
There you go.
Jasper, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate chatting with you. Enjoy your holidays.
You
Enjoy your
too.
family time. Enjoy your vacation, your trip. Don't eat too many waffles while you're back home. Remain fit and sexy the way you are, and I'll see you in 2024.
Sounds good. Sounds good.